terms of the language aspect is this is essentially the same ideal as the kind of evocation that we would do in the Goetia of like sigil magic and stuff like that. You have an idea, which is in itself a form of communication that you can actually like access through like a goetic sigil, for example. And there's some notion that there's an essence of the spirit that is contained in that sigil when it is put on a particular type of metal that gives you a connection to that spirit. So it operates on essentially the same principle. And we can look at this if we look at these terms just in linguistic use. You know, if you say that a particular image or a phrase is evocative of something, I mean, it brings out a reaction in you. It pulls something out. If you talk about how people will invoke things, then they do it the same way that we would invoke a spirit, or you can talk about someone invoking the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for example, to back up something that they're saying. And that is a very similar idea. And I personally think it's entirely possible that these kind of things have that kind of awareness in their own sense. Like, it's a very animistic idea, but when a document or a symbol or an image is surrounded by that much of people's attention, I believe that gives it a certain kind of power. And there's an interesting, I hesitate to even bring this guy up because he's pretty much renowned as a fraud. That would be Carlos Castaneda. I don't know if anyone's familiar with his work. He worked in the 60s. He had like about 2 good books and 10 batshit crazy books. And he was essentially an academic fraud because he claimed his first book was supposed to be I can't remember if it was a master's thesis or a doctoral thesis, but it was about his time spent with a Yaqui Indian who taught him his mystical practices or whatever, which were later found out to A, have nothing to do with Yaqui Indians, and B, probably be completely spurious and invented as a literary device himself. That having been said, one of the most valuable things that he talks about is the concept of attention in this respect, and how you have to be very careful about where you put your attention, and that does have a power in and of itself. I mean, just in the most sort of simple way possible, I think that we can see, you know, if you have your attention on negative things, then, you know, you tend to go into a negative mindset. If you have your attention on positive things, you tend to go into a positive mindset. And this is why Crowley is so anti-thought, which is interesting because he's like the big guy who's always like, you know, we have to use logic and reason, but his whole goal of teaching people logic and reason is to ultimately transcend those ideas and to not engage with them that way, because he is technically anti-rational, even though he does emphasize that we should all be learning about science and math and stuff like that. As one person I know said at one point, you know, you don't transcend playing the guitar by being no good at it. Like, equally, you don't transcend logic by not knowing how to be logical. So that's a big deal. I mean, one of the things Crowley really focuses on when he talks about this is just the whole fact that, what's the example he uses? I think at one point he says, you know, you're not conscious of your stomach unless you're hungry or in pain. You wouldn't be thinking about your stomach otherwise. Like, you know, it's not a place that you would just naturally put your attention. Because thought, as Crowley kind of emphasizes this a lot in the Book of Lies, thought is literally dis-ease. Something is picking at you, so it calls up your attention and you're focused on it, you're thinking about it. This is kind of the opposite way that we want to go with invocation, or evocation for that matter, but that's a little bit more something else, because we want to actively put our attention in a place that will, you know, help us out with something else. And really, attention is not as active as we think it is. It's very reactive. It's very responsive. But the whole point in Thelema is to focus on our wills and, you know, what we're doing to fulfill our wills. And will is always active, never reactive. Will is sort of what gives us the primary force. And I've used this phrase before, but it doesn't hurt to emphasize it. I think we really want to be what I call the source of causal initiative in our lives. We want to be the one causing events to happen. We don't want to be responding to just whatever comes our way. This is one of the most insidious ideas that crops up in New Age technology, the whole I don't even think technology is the word I want to use there, but whatever. The whole idea of like go with the flow, you know, go with the forces of the universe, go along with what's happening around you, don't resist it. And it's like, well, that's just not, it's a loser philosophy in the bottom line. Like, we want to be creating the changes that are happening around us. We don't just want to be going with the flow and responding to whatever. We want to be the flow. What this requires is an ability that, as we were talking about technology before, our technologies have completely destroyed, and that's the ability to concentrate. This is a very basic thing, a very simple skill, but we're getting less and less good at it as a culture, just because we're surrounded by so much information, so many ideas. I don't know about you guys, but when I'm surfing the net, I probably have like 12 windows open at a time, and porn going in the background, and like whatever, like, you know, it's constantly flipping between articles and stuff like that. And I found, especially as someone who, because I'm a big reader, it really interferes with just even the way I read and process information, and like look at a book. I have a hard time like staring at the same thing for an hour at a time, because we're just so used to so many different ideas, different concepts, trying to incorporate all those. So that's a skill that is essential for both of these practices. You cannot do a ceremonial magical ritual successfully if you can't concentrate, first of all. And Crowley often said, when he was with Oster Eckerstein, am I pronouncing that right?
Oscar Eckenstein?
Eckenstein, yeah.
I think it's Eckenstein.
This was a guy who Crowley considered to be one of his most important teachers in yoga, who actually knew nothing about yoga and didn't really practice yoga or magic. He was completely dismissive of all this stuff. But Crowley considered it was his mountain climbing partner, and he considered that to have been one of his most important teachers. And what he always told Crowley was, like, you know, your problem, like the reason that you're struggling with this, that, and the other thing is just you can't concentrate. Like, if we're going to go up this mountain together, and they did a lot of duo trips up various mountains where it was just these two guys, which was a big deal, especially at the time. Like, we're talking about guys with like a compass, you know what I mean? They didn't have the technologies we had, and if they got lost, they were just fucked. So, and they broke a couple of records while they were at it. So, you know, they were obviously very good at it. And to be able to move quickly in an environment like that, well, you know, you're on the side of a snowy cliff, you definitely want to be able to focus. That is very important. Helps with the whole not plummeting to your death aspect. And for Crowley, this was a revelation, and this was really the time that he started to be able to put a lot of the stuff that he had learned in the Golden Dawn into practice. Because the Golden Dawn at Crowley's time had, you know, pretty low standards for advancement, honestly. And a lot of the time, the advancement had to do with how much donations they were willing to put in. Like, you know, Crowley gave Mathers quite a bit of money to just like translate different texts and to halfway do it, and a lot of the time, because Mathers was a severe alcoholic, this shit never really got finished, which is why a lot of our grimoire tradition is just reliant on what he actually managed to complete, and it's not completely done, basically. So that was not a good environment for that kind of training and that kind of teaching, and particularly, like, that's why Crowley later on, when he sort of reformulated the Golden Dawn system into the AA system, he incorporated a lot of yoga that he had learned in modern-day Sri Lanka, just because he saw that as essentially what was missing. Because really, like, the magic doesn't work if you're not doing the yoga, and it's difficult to understand the reason for that until you actually do the yoga. You know, if you have the capacity to actually just sit completely still for an hour, you will learn to concentrate. And that's, like, sitting asana is one of the most annoying things in the world to do. But at the same time, it's very rewarding after a short period of time. The only thing I would add about that is I think there's a tendency to try to go for shorter periods, like just to do it for 20 minutes. And that's really, I find, like the first 10, 15 minutes are where it's really annoying. We're really not happy being there. Whereas when you hit about the half-hour mark, you get comfortable and you can settle into it. So it's important, I think, to actually, like, go the full hour, even if you find yourself fidgeting every 5 minutes and you're racking up breaks like crazy and it's just obnoxious and annoying, but it's still worth doing. And I